So we just had a very chaotic weekend of UFC with UFC 298 taking place and the UFC 300 main event being announced. And now next week we have a pretty good fight night in Mexico in front of a crowd with Moreno versus Royval in a rematch being the main event. Before I do get into that though, I have already covered those topics on my YouTube channel, so you can check out my channel and watch my two recent videos just before this one. And also, before that, you can sign up to the We Want Picks premium membership with my code ARTEM for a 3-day free trial. We Want Picks has been killing it this year. Jacob and Angelo are up units. The lock of the week has been doing pretty well. Unfortunately, it did lose last week. Sorry, Jacob. But you don't just get access to Angelo and Jacob's bets. I'm going to be making an article this week, and especially I'm going to be talking about PFL versus Bellator, which I will be talking about later this week. But you will get an article from me there, and content from, I believe, like 6 different channels. There's an AI fight selector there, and like an AI pick doctor is what it's called, as well as all of these other tools for $10 per month. But if you just want to check it out, there's a 3-day free trial if you sign up with the code ARTEM, and you can cancel during that 3-day period, so you can get 3 days for free with that code. And with all of that being said, now let's just get into the first fight of the night, which is going to be, according to ESPN, Muhammad Naimov versus Erik Silva. I like Muhammad Naimov in this one here, and in my opinion, this is actually, to start with, it's a step down in competition, but stylistically, it is actually a pretty bad matchup for Muhammad Naimov because he just fought Nathaniel Wood, who, in my opinion, is a much better fighter than Erik Silva, but stylistically is a little bit different. Erik Silva is a pure grappler, and that's kind of it. He doesn't really have anything else. I believe his dad came up with like a specific martial arts which he follows, but he's a grappler for the most part, and that's kind of all he does. Before he did get into the UFC, he was on a massive rear naked choke first round streak, which was very impressive for Lux. And then he beat Anvar Boynazarov, who was a former Glory kickboxer, dominated him in 90 seconds. And then TJ Brown really killed his hype. And I'll be honest, I was actually pretty high on Erik Silva because I think Erik Silva is a very good fighter and a very good grappler. But I'm just not sold on him now at the age of 37. This is an old guy coming into the UFC, and now he's taking on Muhammad Naimov. This is a real test, though, for Naimov. It really is, because Muhammad Naimov, I would almost describe as being a pure striker. His takedown defense hasn't really been tested too much in the UFC. I mean, he did come in there against Jamie Malaki and then beat Nathaniel Wood by controversial decision. Erik Silva, I don't think his takedowns are going to be good enough to get Naimov down. And Naimov's a really good kickboxer. I believe he's a former world champion in kickboxing. I believe it was WAKO kickboxing that he won the title in world championships, I should say. I think he's good enough. He's a good striker. He's proven to be a good striker. I think he can knock out Erik Silva. He's just a much, much better striker, and Tapology heavily agrees with it. The odds heavily agree with it as well. Minus 280 is pretty wide. But we've got another pretty big kind of favorite going on here in Felipe dos Santos versus Victor Altamirano. And I'm going to put this out here right now. Felipe dos Santos. I am probably the biggest Felipe dos Santos fan on the planet. And I genuinely believe that. You know, I've been talking about Felipe dos Santos on my YouTube channel for so long now because I think he is so fun. I almost want to say I've been talking about him for almost 2 years. It was after he beat Rafael Montoro where I really found out about him. Then he fought in the LFA against Hugo Paiva. I've recommended this fight, I almost want to say 10 times on my channel. If you haven't seen it, please watch it. You could argue that Hugo Paiva should win the fight, honestly, but that is one of the best fights you will ever see, and it's an exact example of what Felipe dos Santos does bring to the table in his fighting style. He fights like Charles Oliveira, but more aggressive. I'll say it again. He fights like Charles Oliveira, but more aggressive. That's how fun he is. And I love Felipe. If you actually watch his fight against Manuel, there is a maniac in the crowd in Australia screaming, "Go Felipe! You can get him, Felipe!" That was me. You can actually hear me if you listen closely. I was screaming my lungs out, mate, during that fight. And I know he lost the cup, but he had a very good performance, and I think a lot of a better performance than many people expected. He's really big for 125 pounds. He uses that size well. He's a decent Muay Thai striker, and he does grapple as well, but his takedowns aren't great. I think he's good enough to get past Victor Altamirano, who is a good boxer, a decent wrestler. I've seen him wrestle before. But for the most part, I think the way that Felipe dos Santos fights, I think he can just overwhelm Altamirano. I mean, Altamirano lost to Tim Elliott in a fight which Tim Elliott just dominated in the wrestling. A different style matchup to this one. But he beats Salvador, who we know isn't very good. Lacerda, who we know isn't very good. Hernandez, he lost to by split decision. We probably could have and maybe should have won that fight. And that has aged pretty well. Before that, he beat Candelario, which aged badly as well. I think Dos Santos goes out there. I think he overwhelms Altamirano because he's so aggressive. It's insane. He's got no defense, though. It's worth bringing up. And although I am, as I said, self-proclaimed the biggest Felipe Dos Santos fan on the planet, I don't like Dos Santos at minus 285. I think he's too wide, man. I love Dos Santos. I think he's a great fighter. He's got a lot of ads. He's got like a lot of great things, but he's got a lot of flaws as well. You know, there's a lot of things that Felipe Dos Santos does. He leaves himself open. He's too aggressive, even though his aggressiveness is his main weapon. I can just see things maybe just not quite going too well for Dos Santos in the future, but I do think he beats Altamirano. I'm going to pick Dos Santos here. I'm actually going to pick Dos Santos by finish. This guy's a maniac, man. He just goes forward. He's so fun. I'm going to pick him by knockout, you know, because he's very big for the weight class. He's 5'7". I know Altamirano is 5'8". Dos Santos is big for 125, man. You saw it in the cup fight. And now we've got Luis Rodriguez taking on Dennis Bondar. And I am picking Luis Rodriguez here. There is a little bit of I guess like an error in the odds here from Tapology. Dennis Bondar is the favorite, but I think he's a slight favorite. If you look at the odds here, Dennis Bondar is like minus 130, minus 115, minus 125. And Luis Rodriguez is like plus 100, which is here on Tapology. I'm picking Luis Rodriguez as the underdog because of his record and what he looks like on paper. I think a lot of people are going to blindly bet him, and I think that you probably won't see him be the underdog by the time the fight rolls around. So maybe you could bet on Rodriguez at plus money and then wait for the odds to maybe flip and then bet on Bondar at plus money and kind of work something like that, but that's always super risky, and I think a lot of sports books don't allow you to do that. I do want to say this right now, though. I am picking Rodriguez as an underdog, and a lot of people are. There's 86% of people out there picking Rodriguez to beat Bondar. Watch the tape on Rodriguez before you place your money on him, I do advise, because I don't think Rodriguez is that good. Now, don't get me wrong, Rodriguez is a guy I've been saying should be on the Dana White's Contender Series for about a while now. He has been on there before, and he lost a decision which he probably should have won, to be honest, against Jerome Rivera. And then he went on to just beat a bunch of guys at Lux Fight League. A bunch of guys with pretty decent records and decent experience if they didn't have a good record. But I just don't think he's that good. I'll be honest. Like, at 125 pounds, the key to being good at 125 is you have to be really, really technical. And Luis Rodriguez just isn't. He's a boxer. And that's kind of all he really is. You know, he keeps his hands very, very high. But when he throws strikes, he leaves himself very, very open. He's only 24 years old, and I think like maybe just more time to develop would have been beneficial to him. But I'm picking Rodriguez more of a fade to Dennis Bondar, as I don't think Dennis Bondar is UFC level. I'm not sure about Rodriguez, but I know that Bondar isn't. He broke his arm against Malcolm Gordon, so you can write that fight off. That was just really unfortunate. But against Carlos Hernandez, man, he just had nothing for him. You would have expected him to grapple because he's got a lot of finishes by submission, but he didn't grapple at all. And instead, he just kind of got boxed up by Hernandez and made Hernandez look really, really good on the feet with his boxing. Before that, he hasn't really fought the best guys. You know, he's finished a lot of guys very early on in his career. A lot of first-round finishes, but just a lot of guys with very shallow records or just fighters with bad records. You know, at the end of the day, I think that Rodriguez gets past him, but I think this is a fight, honestly, maybe to stay away from. Even though you look at Rodriguez at plus money, I'm just not sold. I really do heavily recommend watching tape on this one here, especially on the Rodriguez side. He does have a lot of fights on Fight Pass. His Lux Fight League is on Fight Pass. They're pretty easy to find. You can find tape on Rodriguez without too much problems. I will also bring up Jorge Masvidal pops up out of nowhere on a few of his fights, and you cannot hear a word he's saying because he talks so quietly. Anyway, now we've got Claudio Puelles taking on Ziam in the next matchup. I'm going to pick Ziam here, but it is still a dangerous matchup, though, because I know Claudio Puelles got absolutely dominated by one of my favorite fighters ever, Dan Hooker, where he went out there against Dan Hooker, and he Imanari rolled. He rolled around like a little bit of an idiot, kind of like Ryan Hall style, maybe even like Carlos Vera from last weekend at 298 against Renny Nakamura. and he was just leg locking, rolling for leg locks, rolling for leg locks. Hooker was able to kind of get out of him, and eventually Puelles just gassed out, and Hooker was piecing him off on the feet. Eventually finished him off on the feet in the second round. Puelles got embarrassed, and I think a lot of people got embarrassed in that fight as well, because the amount of people picking Claudio Puelles to beat Dan Hooker was insane. It was crazy. He's taken so much time off now, I think, mostly to deal with the embarrassment of the loss, to be honest. But now he's back, and he's taken on a guy which, honestly, I think has made a lot of rapid improvements, and almost could be, I guess, in a way, almost compared to Dan Hooker in style. You know, for Ziam, he's 6'1" with a 75-inch reach, so he's taller than Puelles with a longer reach, and he has made some really good improvements in his striking. I do know that his last win wasn't over the best opponent, it was over Yair. Sorry, I was thinking about the Mikhail Figlak fight. Mikhail Figlak looked really, really good in France, I believe that one was, and then he went out there and fought Yair and looked pretty good again with the striking. Not quite as impressive of a performance as the Figlak fight, in my personal opinion, but he's shown very good improvements, and we know for a fact he will be a better striker than Puelles. He just needs to be able to defend the takedowns. He just needs to be able to avoid the Imanari rolls, the leg locks that Puelles will be going for. Now, although it does look dumb, it still is somewhat effective, and it probably is pretty hard to prepare for, because there's probably not a lot of guys on the planet that are just going to spam Imanari rolls like that. Maybe Puelles just ditches the Imanari roll and goes for traditional takedowns, but even then his takedown offense I don't think is great. I think Ziam just pieces him up on the feet. I think Ziam beats him here. Once again, like, although I think Puelles is a bum, and I don't think he's very good, it's still kind of hard to be super confident in Ziam, just because of the danger that Puelles may possess in that matchup with the submission. You know, like, Puelles submitted Clay Guida, who's a very tough guy to finish, should I add. And now we've got Edgar Chairez versus Daniel Lacerda. I mean, this fight, I'm going to be honest, it's just a mess. It's just a mess. And the reason why it's a mess is because it's a rebooking for like the third or the fourth time. I mean, Daniel Lacerda fought against Edgar Chairez, and then it was a no contest due to the premature stoppage. But even then, that was pretty controversial because he dropped his arm, but he wasn't out. In my opinion, I actually kind of am on the side that it should have been a no contest. I know that's actually a very small island to stand on, because a lot of people are thinking that Edgar Chairez should have just won by a guillotine, but I do think that the ref made the error in that matchup, and then it was rebooked very soon after the fight happened, and then it got pulled. I think Lacerda pulled out. Yeah, he did. So then Chairez just ended up having to wait, and here we are in Mexico now, in Edgar Chairez's backyard, and I think Edgar Chairez is just going to beat Lacerda. Minus 380, though. It's kind of hard to pick like that kind of size favorite. I wouldn't bet on Chairez at minus 380. I just don't really recommend it. This fight is a mess, though. It is. I mean, Chairez is massive for the weight class. He's a decent boxer, and he's a decent grappler as well. We actually saw that against Tatsuro Taira. We did give Tatsuro Taira a pretty difficult fight on short notice as well. He also gave Clayton Carpenter a very difficult fight on short notice, who I think is a pretty good up-and-coming prospect. Lacerda's lost so many in a row. He's just... And another thing about Lacerda is, in his fight against Chairez, you know, he slowed down, yeah, and he just, like, wasn't as aggressive as he was. He was known for being ridiculously aggressive and coming forward, and then it looked like he'd slowed down, looked like he had kind of taken it back a step. I don't think that's good for Lacerda. I think the way that Lacerda should win fights is just to be overly aggressive and just fight like the idiot that he was fighting like. I just don't think that fighting reserved is a good style for Lacerda. I don't think he's good enough to pull it off. I think Chairez beats him. I think Chairez probably just beats him by, I'm just going to say, submission. I mean, Lacerda makes so many rookie errors on the ground. The most egregious being against Figueiredo. That was 2 years ago, but why did I spend so long talking about this fight? Chairez is going to win, in my opinion, obviously, but come on, why are we booking it again? Now we've got Jesus Aguilar taking on Mateus Mendonca, and this is one of those fights where I feel like the public is on the side of the underdog, but the small minority of the public is on the favorite. And I'm with the small minority of the public. I am going to be picking Mateus Mendonca in this matchup here. But the first thing I want to say is Mateus Mendonca has been very disappointing, in my opinion, in the UFC. He came in there and knocked out Ashik Azim, who turns out to maybe not be that great, because I think Ashik Azim recently just got KO'd by Wilson Indrajoni on the regional scene. But anyway, it happened. He knocked him out in the first round, looked great. Then fought Javid Bashara, and in my opinion, I know he lost 30-27 on a lot of scorecards. You could maybe give a round to Mendonca, I thought he still put up a decent fight, you know, and then he went out there and he lost to the absolute skeleton that is Nate Maness at 125 pounds by KO in round number 1, which is a very bad performance. And that wasn't even that long ago, it was only 4 months ago. But I do think Mateus Mendonca is the better striker in this matchup. Jesus Aguilar is very small for this weight class. He's 5'4" with a 62-inch reach, 9.5 inches shorter in reach than Mateus Mendonca, but he's a wrestler for the most part. I know that we did see him send him to his father, so he's... Oh, I ruined my joke. I know we saw him send Shannon Ross to his father in his last fight because he knocked him out so bad, he probably sent him to heaven. That you might think he might be a striker with crazy power. He is a wrestler for the most part. That's what he does. You know, against Erison Fahea, he managed to win that fight with the wrestling and with the guillotine, which is his signature move. You look into this guy, Jesus Aguilar, he's got a lot of guillotines. You know, a lot of these guillotines can come from, you know, being underneath. Some of them can be from him just being on top and mount and pulling up the guillotine. That's how he managed to beat Erison Fahea. And I think the way that he pulls it off is he's got these short little arms and he's super muscular with the short little build that he's got. He can just generate so much power in that guillotine. I think Mendonca's the better striker. I think he's just better as a striker. I think he can keep this fight on the feet. I think he's got good enough takedown defense to defend takedowns against Aguilar. Aguilar's not going to be as good of a wrestler as Javid Basharat was, and that fight was at bantamweight. This is at flyweight where Mendonca's going to be bigger. I think Mendonca beats Jesus Aguilar. I'm going to pick Mendonca. I'm going to pick Mendonca by KO. I'm picking the favorite, even though he is, I guess, like minorly underrated by the public, if that makes sense. Cristian Quinonez versus Raoni Barcelos is the next matchup. Oh, okay, before recording this video, obviously, when I do my research, and my pick was Raoni Barcelos, but now I'm like sitting here, I'm like, man, I don't know, but I'm going to pick Raoni Barcelos. I think that's the safe pick. I think that's the smart pick. Raoni Barcelos, of course, as most people know by now, a Brazilian national wrestling champion, a guy that was the number 16th ranked guy for a long time. And what I mean by that is a guy that wasn't ranked, but he was always that guy that was like right there. If you beat Raoni Barcelos, you would become ranked. If you lost to Raoni Barcelos, then you just weren't quite ready for the rankings. But then he lost the fight to Timur Valiev, which was controversial. It was a decision. A draw on a scorecard. A lot of people had it as a draw. Some people even scored it to Barcelos. And then Victor Henry takes him on short notice, or somewhat short notice since it was rebooked, and just throws like a record, a UFC record in strikes against them. And then obviously since then he has just lost a couple of fights. And it does seem like he has lost a little bit of a step with his age, because he's now almost 37 years old. And he's taking on a young, up-and-coming, hungry Cristian Quinonez, who I think is going to be too prone to be taken down, which is why I think Barcelos is going to be able to win. Quinonez is a striker for the most part with a lot of power. He knocks out a lot of his opponents, but we actually saw him get knocked down by Kyung Ho Kang, who read him like a book in that matchup. A very impressive performance from Kyung Ho Kang, and then turned it into a submission. He knocked out Khalid Taha, but Taha has been KO'd a few times. He beat Long Zhao by decision, but there are genuinely people out there that think Long Zhao could have had a shot at winning that fight, but I do think Quinonez won it. There are people out there that think Zhao actually might have beaten him, but Long Zhao's a good fighter, a very good grappler, who was on the road to UFC last season, which just ended, obviously. But did Long Zhao win? Did Long Zhao win the tournament? I don't know if he did. Oh no, he pulled out. Long Zhao maybe will be fighting in the UFC at some point. I got really sidetracked here. The pick is Raoni Barcelos. I'm going to pick him by decision. I just hope he uses the wrestling, because Quinonez is a dangerous guy. He's got power. He wants to knock out Barcelos. I think if Barcelos wrestles, I think if he grapples, he's going to be better than Quinonez. I think he wins a decision. Sorry, I got very sidetracked talking about Long Zhao. For some reason, I have a lot of knowledge on the Chinese regional MMA scene. I know it's very random, but I just kind of do, because I like following them, because they fight super, super often. The next fight is Manuel Torres taking on Chris Duncan. I'm picking Manuel Torres in this one here. This is maybe a fight which the odds could flip potentially again, even though if you do look at the votes, the majority of people are on Torres. At the moment, I think that the stock on Chris Duncan's pretty low, even though he is 2-0 in the UFC. I think he's had two somewhat disappointing performances. He looked pretty low volume, a little bit tentative, a little bit almost exposed against Omar Morales. Then he takes on Yanal Ishmouz, who literally broke his forearm in the first round and was like jiggling it around in the corner between rounds 1 and 2. Absolutely disgusting, if you ask me. Like, dude, you could see his arm jiggling around. It was like broken in half. It was horrific, man. Like, I can't deal with stuff like that when I'm watching. But anyway, he takes on Yanal Ishmouz, who breaks his arm really badly. And Yanal Ishmouz could do nothing with his right arm. So he was only like really throwing kicks and like left punches, like a jab, obviously. I think Ishmouz is actually a southpaw. He was throwing left straights and he was throwing left hooks, and that was it. And he couldn't finish Yanal Ishmouz, a guy with one arm who couldn't do a thing. And Ishmouz was still finding success with one arm against Chris Duncan. It was crazy. I think that Chris Duncan's come into the UFC and he's not looking as impressive as he did on the regional scene. On the Dana White's Contender Series, he got knocked down a couple of times and had that crazy comeback KO against Charles Campbell, which was super impressive, and he showed off his power, and we know he's got power, but I think that he's got a little bit of a suspect chin. He got KO'd by Vyacheslav Borchev, who obviously is a great kickboxer on the Contender Series, got dropped and knocked around silly by Charlie Campbell, who's now in the UFC, so a good win. But Manuel Torres, man, he showed us some lights out power in a potential KO of the year. I believe I had this as like my number 5 KO of the year, if I'm not mistaken, when he KO'd Nicholas Motta with that elbow and sent him to the Shadow Realm. He sent him to Jesus Aguilar's father. Brutal KO. It was unreal. And to be honest, in that moment, you know, Torres wasn't looking that great because Torres isn't the most, he's not very technical, but he's aggressive, and boy is he powerful. I think he touches the chin of Chris Duncan just because I don't think Chris Duncan's chin's that good. I think Chris Duncan is going to try and work in takedowns here, and one thing I will actually mention about Duncan too is he is massive for 155. I know you see 5'10" and think, you know, that's like a pretty reasonable height for a lightweight. This guy is huge, man. This guy is he's built just like me. Not really, unfortunately, but he's built well. He's built good. He's a big guy for 155. But I think Torres' power is just going to be that equalizer. And now we got Yazmin Yauregui taking on Sam Hughes. Man, this actually might be a fight that Sam Hughes wins. And I'm not even joking. I'm going to pick Yazmin Yauregui, though. I think she's the much better striker. But Sam Hughes has had a pretty impressive career resurgence. If I'm not mistaken about Sam Hughes, she started her UFC career with 3 losses in a row, should I say, actually. One of them being a short notice fight where she just got dominated by Tecia Torres, who, if they had a women's atomweight division, Tecia Torres would be the champion 10 out of 10 times. And she loses 3 times in the UFC. She's on her 4th fight on the contract, but I believe during this period of time between the Pinheiro and the Nunes fight, I think she either quit her job or she moved location. Like, she just kind of upped and left everything to train at a gym full time, and she did that, and she obviously went out there and beat Estela Nunes. Nunes had success at the start, but then Sam Hughes was able to rally back and have a lot of success in rounds 2 and 3. Then she beat Elise Reed, which is a good win, or not a great win, but it's a good win. Loses to Pereira Rodriguez, but then beats Amarin by having much better cardio. The point is, Sam Hughes kind of wins a lot of fights just by having really, really good cardio and being able to out-wrestle her opponents in rounds 2 and 3. Yauregui is a very impressive prospect. In fact, I would say that she's one of the most impressive prospects to see at strawweight. One of the most impressive strawweight prospects we've probably ever seen. And women's fighters we've got in the UFC right now. Coming with a lot of hype. Had a very fun fight against Yazmin Lucindo. And then she went out there and beat Estela Nunes by KO after getting caught herself. And then she goes and fights Denise Gomes, who just fights like rushing forward, super aggressive. And she got clipped very early on in that fight. An unfortunate loss to take, but it did happen. Now we've got a pretty stylistically difficult matchup for Yazmin Yauregui, though, because we haven't really seen Yauregui have to deal with someone who obviously is going to go out there and just try and take her down over and over and over again, and someone that we know has really, really good cardio and will push a very heavy pace in rounds 2 and especially in rounds 3, because Sam Hughes has always been able to at least outlast her opponents in the cardio sort of aspect of the sport. Whereas with Yauregui, I think she's going to have to kind of box her up and keep the fight on the feet for all 3 rounds, which could be easier said than done, because wrestling and defending takedowns really does gas out fighters, and especially if you're a striker, wrestling will tire you out more than striking, if that makes sense, just because it's kind of like a different kind of cardio. It's like when I was boxing back in my glory days, like 4 months ago. When I was boxing, you know, I could go to a box fit session and I could box for 90 minutes. But if you actually looked at me, you wouldn't really believe me because I'm actually a pretty like big guy. Like I'm slightly overweight, which is a little bit embarrassing, but we're working on that. But I couldn't run, you know, for like 10Ks or whatever. But I could go to a boxing session and box for a long time. It's kind of similar to that, where the strikers are able to strike for a long time, but they're not able to wrestle for a long time, and maybe it works vice versa like that. I think that Sam Hughes could really wear on Yauregui and give her a very hard time in rounds 2 and 3, but I do think Yauregui, at the end of the day, her striking's too good. I think she's going to be able to box up Sam Hughes, especially when she's trying to make those entries. As soon as Sam Hughes tries to go for a takedown, Yauregui's going to throw an uppercut or a hook or something like that. She's going to be able to defend the takedowns and just box up Sam Hughes as the much better striker. I know that was a long breakdown for a fighter that's like minus 400, but it's one of those matchups, man. I'm really bad at predicting women's MMA as well, so it's a little bit scary for me. Now we can move on to Raul Rosas Jr. taking on Ricky Turcios. And Raul Rosas Jr., of course, is one of the most hyped fighters in the UFC right now. People love him. Some people don't like him, which is, I guess, not really that understandable, actually, now that I bring it up. Because he's 18. He was 18 when he signed to the UFC. I think he was 17, actually, when he signed to the UFC. And people were hating on him, man. Like, I believe he's got something wrong with his face, like a facial deformity or something. And although, like, some of the memes can be kind of funny, I do think it's pretty mean, making fun of a young guy. But Raul Rosas Jr., you can't deny him. He's a very, very good prospect, a very good wrestler, and a very good grappler. He did kind of get exposed in his fight against Cristian Rodriguez, where he had a very good first round, but he just blew his load in round number 1 because he was spamming takedowns, man, over and over and over again. He kind of did what he did to Mando Gutierrez, where he was just taking him down over and over and over again. But when Raul Rosas Jr. was on the offense and not on the defense, he was able to keep going and going and going against Mando. Very impressive performance. He finished JPRN pretty easily. But then against Cristian Rodriguez, Rodriguez was able to defend a lot of those takedowns and made Raul Rosas Jr. work a lot harder than he would have had to work if the fight was getting down to the ground and if he was controlling, if he was dominating on top. And eventually Raul Rosas Jr. gassed out in rounds 2 and really badly gassed out in rounds 3, and it was just kind of obvious that he wasn't going to be able to get the takedowns. And on the feet, when he was super tired, he just didn't really have like anything to really offer against Cristian Rodriguez, so Rodriguez just kind of boxed him up and out-grappled him in his own sort of situations. Goes out there against Terrence Mitchell, knocks out Terrence Mitchell pretty badly, to be honest. But I do hope that KO whenever Terrence Mitchell doesn't make him think that he's a very good striker, because I'd much rather see Raul Rosas Jr. go to the grappling, even if it is against Ricky Turcios, who is a good grappler in his own right. If you do look into Ricky Turcios, he does have one submission win, but why do I do this to myself? He's got one submission win, but he is a good grappler. Most of his wins are by decision. Of course, he did win the Ultimate Fighter Season 29, and I can somewhat proudly say that I picked him to win before the season started. It kind of, in hindsight, was an easy pick because Ricky Turcios was the only fighter that had actually fought good competition on that season. But anyway, I digress. He lost to Zahabi in a very odd fight, which was mostly striking, where he like missed a lot of shots and didn't throw much. It was just a very weird performance, to say the least. Just didn't engage really. It was just a weird fight. I just kind of put it like that. Kevin Natividad, I mean, there's a close fight with a guy that hadn't even fought in a long time. It's just, yeah. Ricky Turcios is confusing to me. It almost seems like he's not taking his career as seriously as a lot of other guys in the UFC. I don't want to make the allegation, but if you do watch his fights, there's definitely questions to be had. I do think Raul Rosas Jr. can take down Ricky Turcios. I hope he's kind of sorted out the cardio, which, you know, I'm sure he's kind of learnt from his loss to Cristian Rodriguez. Maybe he's working on his cardio a bit more. Maybe he's working on being a bit more patient in the cage, which I can imagine must be very, very hard for a 19-year-old to be patient in an MMA cage. I mean, yeah, I can imagine it will be very tough. But Rosas Jr., I think he's going to make improvements. I think he's going to go out there against Turcios. I'm more going to side with the decision, I guess, because I think Turcios is tough, but I think Rosas Jr. is going to be constantly searching for submissions. Actually, I'm going to pick Rosas Jr. by finish, late finish as well. I think he's going to be constantly searching for submissions. Turcios is going to have to be constantly defending them, and I eventually feel like one of them is going to stick and Rosas Jr. is going to win the fight. I'm going to pick him to win. Honestly, probably by like rear naked choke, which is a pretty common submission, or maybe something from top mount, like an arm triangle or something like that. Now we've got Daniel Zellhuber taking on Francisco Prado. And this one was kind of an interesting one for me when it got announced, because Francisco Prado, for some reason, said that he wanted to move up to 170 pounds after his fight against Otman Azaita, which I thought was odd, because although he is 5'11", which is pretty tall for 155, I think he would be very small for 170, and I don't think he would look that good at 170. He's taking on Daniel Zellhuber, who's a very good prospect, was 12-0 undefeated when he made his debut for the UFC. Lost to Trey Ogden in a striking fight where maybe the nerves got the better of him. That's kind of all I can really think about when it comes to that sort of fight, because Trey Ogden was kind of beat him on the feet. He has an awkward style, does Ogden, but there's no excuse for Zellhuber to lose to Ogden. It's just really bad. And then he goes out there, he beats Lando Venata, drops him, almost finishes him in the first round, and then beats Christos Giagos by submission in a pretty impressive performance. It seems like Daniel Zellhuber is starting to find his feet in the UFC, and I think he beats Prado. Prado is not very technical, but he's very fun. He's a finisher, man. Like, this guy throws absolute bombs. If you watch his fight against Malaki, he's just trying to take his head off the whole time, which is pretty fun. He's 21 years old. Most of his wins are in the first round. All of them are by finish. He's fought a lot of guys that aren't super great in Samurai Fight House, which is a great promotion, by the way. These guys actually watch my channel when I talk about their fighters, so I love Samurai Fight House. Their tapes also pretty easy to find. A lot of it you can find on YouTube. But yeah, Francisco Prado, I don't think it's a good matchup for him. I'm sure Samurai Fight House will disagree, but I think Daniel Zellhuber is the much more technical striker. I think he can use his range to his advantage. He doesn't have a big reach advantage in this fight, but I think that he should be able to fight from range more than Prado, just kind of with more tools that he's got, especially in the boxing. And I think he just outboxes Francisco Prado for 3 rounds, unless he lands something big and gets a KO, because Prado is going to be moving forward and throwing absolute bombs, but he's going to leave himself open. So it's either Zellhuber by KO or decision for me, so I'm going to be picking Daniel Zellhuber in this fight here. Now we move on to the co-main event. Yair Rodriguez taking on Brian Ortega. And for someone that's only a -165 favorite, I'm very confident that Yair Rodriguez should be able to win this one here. Brian Ortega has not won a fight since 2020. He hasn't won a fight in 3 years, and that was against Chan Sung Jung, who, to be fair, is a good fighter, and especially was a good fighter then. He's obviously now retired. And then he lost to Volk, where, you know, he had moments, but he still got absolutely dominated in that fight. Most people just remember the moments that he had, but Volkanovski just absolutely pummeled him from start to finish in that matchup, man. It was starting to get pretty ugly, and then Volk kind of like lost the fifth because he was getting tired of beating Ortega up. And then he went out there and lost to Yair Rodriguez due to that injury. But in that fight, which was the last fight, obviously, for Brian Ortega, but wasn't the last fight for Yair Rodriguez, in that matchup, Ortega's getting pieced up on the feet. It's worth noting this fight only lasts like less than 1 round. But in that fight, the short period of time that the fight lasts, Yair Rodriguez is piecing him up on the feet, and when the fight does get down to the ground, Yair Rodriguez throws up an armbar, which then Ortega gets injured trying to get out of. So it was almost like Yair Rodriguez threw up a submission that injured Ortega. So it's kind of one of those sort of situations where Yair Rodriguez grappling might be better than we think it is. Do I think it's better than Brian Ortega's? No, to be honest. I mean, Ortega's one of the best grapplers in the UFC, especially one of the best grapplers at 145 pounds. He's not as good at striking at Yair as Yair. Yair's a lot more fluid. He's got a lot more like dynamics. He's got a lot more versatility. He's got more kicks. He's got more punches, and that's kind of what Yair's pretty much been known for in his career. Just kind of being that guy that can throw spinning kicks and throw X kicks, just throw crazy sort of strikes. He has calmed it down a lot now that he's managed to make it to the rankings. I think the Frankie Edgar fight was kind of a big wake-up call for him, because he lost that by getting dominated in the wrestling and controlled. But then he beats Jeremy Stevens, took a couple years off, come back against Max Holloway, and what do you know? Underrated performance for Yair, in my opinion. He made Max Holloway wrestle, and obviously this was 2 years ago Max Holloway, who some people could argue is probably better than present-day Holloway. Well, obviously Holloway, most people he fights, he just absolutely dominates them with the boxing and the volume. But Yair Rodriguez kept it competitive on the feet, and he made it so competitive on the feet that he was able to take rounds off Holloway, and Holloway had to win rounds against Yair Rodriguez by mixing in takedowns to really secure the round and make the judges know that he won the round, if that makes sense. So yeah, Yair, good striking performance against Holloway, beat Ortega in that fight that I just kind of described, and then he beat Josh Emmett by submission to win the interim belt, I should say. Sorry, it was an interim belt, I believe. Yeah. Good performance again, and then he lost to Volk by KO. Some people think it was due to a headbutt, but Yair had time away from... I'm not even going to get into it. The point is, I think Yair's a much better striker than Ortega. I think he should be able to defend the takedowns of Ortega. And even if the fight gets down to the ground, I don't think Yair's as lost on the ground now as a lot of people think he might have been. The reason why he did take 2 years off, though, is... I believe it's documented that he was running away from USADA because he was suspended from the UFC. He was suspended by USADA for not taking USADA tests. So I'll kind of leave it like that. But he had 2 years off to make improvements, and he did use those years to make very good improvements, especially in the grappling, which we did see in that fight against Ortega. Ortega's fighting after 3 years off. I mean, he's had that kind of situation in his personal life where his partner has left him, Tracy Cortez, but I'm not going to get into that. I don't really look into that sort of thing too much, but there is still that going on with him, obviously. He hasn't fought in a year and a half, and his last win is 3 years ago, man. I don't know. I don't think you can really kind of create a strong base to pick Brian Ortega, and I really think Rodriguez wins this matchup. I'm pretty confident in it, and I think he does knock him out. So let me get Rodriguez, and it's also worth noting as well, he showed improved grappling against Josh Emmett too, even though he was beating him up on the feet pretty bad. Brandon Moreno is going to be taking on Brandon Royval. And Brandon Royval, much respect to him, because he took this fight on short notice, not long after he lost to Alejandro Pantoja as well in that title fight, which was pretty boring, which is a shame, because, you know, Royval and Pantoja usually put on really fun fights. But, yeah, sorry, I should have gone to Brandon Moreno's profile. If you go to Brandon Moreno's profile, his original scheduled opponent was Amir Albazi, but Amir Albazi had to pull out of that fight, so in steps in, freshly off a title fight loss, by the way, Brandon Royval to give us a rematch here in the main event. A lot of respect for Royval. I like the fight a lot. And I feel like if Moreno wins and Moreno beats Royval, I think you probably will see Alejandro Pantoja versus Moreno 4 as the UFC 301 main event. Honestly, I don't really think Moreno should just get a rematch after one win, especially when he's lost to the champion 3 times. But it is what it is. It's just what flyweight is like at the moment. Hopefully someone just kind of comes up and really kind of makes a stamp in this sort of top area of the weight class, and maybe that's Manuel. Who knows? But Brandon Moreno, in this matchup, obviously, he's a very good boxer, and he's just good everywhere. He's a very good boxer, though he's mostly known for his jab, which he does use quite well, whereas Brandon Royval, I should say, sorry, is also a striker who's very aggressive. He is a grappler too, he can grapple, but we did see him get out-wrestled and out-grappled by Pantoja, so maybe his grappling isn't really as strong as maybe some people expected it to be, but his striking's very good, and he's very big for the weight class as well. He's 5'9" at 125, and he's got a pretty good build for it as well. He's very aggressive, very powerful, throws up flying knees, can catch people with anything. You know, he caught Mateus Nicolau with a knee coming in, he submitted Matt Chanel, had a pretty decent fight against Kaikara France as well, which ended in that second round submission win. The loss to Brandon Royval, it ended up in the first round, but it was a pretty fun fight before it ended up happening. And then I believe the shoulder injury happened, and then Royval knocked him out at the end of the first. Sorry guys, it's super late when I'm recording the video, and I've recorded like 3 videos today, so oh man, my brain is melted in the main event. The pick is Brandon Moreno. I do think Moreno wins, and I think at minus 250, you're getting pretty good odds. And I think Moreno wins. I feel like if Royval is to beat Moreno, it's because Moreno is winning until he doesn't win. Because we did see Moreno get knocked down by Alejandro Pantoja, who I am willing to say is a much worse striker than Brandon Moreno. He still got caught in the first round and dropped in that matchup. Brandon Royval is wild. He's powerful. He's big. He could catch Brandon Moreno coming in, just like Pantoja was able to catch him in that matchup. Another thing as well is, although I do think Royval's grappling is worse than Pantoja's, evidenced by the most recent fight between Pantoja and Royval, you could see Royval potentially try and go out there and out-grapple Moreno as well, especially using that size and that grappling, and also just kind of his relentless aggression. Both guys fight pretty aggressively. Both guys have very good cardio. But I think at the end of the day, Moreno is just the better striker. I think he's the better fighter overall as well. And I think especially this fight being in Mexico heavily favors Moreno, because Moreno's kind of been calling for this for a pretty long time. So I think he's going to make the most of the opportunity and win by decision. I'm interested to see, though, what the title picture looks like at 125, because we know almost as a fact that Alejandro Pantoja will be fighting at UFC 301 in Brazil. But who will his opponent be? Will it be the winner of this fight? Will it be Amir Albazi? Will it maybe even potentially be against Manuel or somebody else that... Who knows, man? There's a lot going on. Maybe it could be like Tatsuro Taira. I don't know. I think Taira's got a fight booked, but you know, there could be a lot going on at 125 that we don't know about. But I'm pretty sure the winner of this fight, especially if it's Moreno, is probably going to fight Pantoja at UFC 301. Let me know what you think of my picks in the comments below, and hope to see you guys in the next video. I've got a few videos coming out this week. There's a lot going on, man. And I will kind of just shout out the end of this one. I will be making a video on PFL versus Bellator very, very soon. So see you guys in the next one.